The moment I started counting exits, I should have known things with Curtis had stopped being fixable. I'd been doing it without realizing, cataloging the fastest way out of every room I walked into. The coffee shop on King Street where we met his friends. My sister's building in Leslieville. The lobby of Vashenko Group's offices at Bay and Wellington. 3 years of that job, 2.5 years with Curtis, and somewhere in the overlap I'd started moving through the city like a person who needed escape routes. It was a Tuesday in late March when it finally crystallized. The way things do when you've been not looking at them for too long. I was at my desk on the 14th floor, working through a stack of compliance filings that needed to reach our commercial attorney before end of day. The windows faced south over Lake Ontario, and the ice had just started to pull back from the shoreline. I'd been watching the water when my phone buzzed. "Who were you talking to in the parking garage?" I set the message aside and kept working. Curtis always knew when I'd been downstairs. He'd convinced me to enable location sharing 8 months ago, framing it as safety. He checked it the way some people check the weather. Constantly, automatically, with the same low-grade anxiety underneath every single time. "That was Bodan," I typed back, "Mr. Vashenko's driver. He was holding the elevator." The reply came in under a minute. "You were laughing." Bodan had made a joke about the construction noise on Adelaide. I had laughed. I didn't type that. I'd learned not to offer details that became ammunition. "Everything all right, Ms. Brennan?" I looked up. Nikolai Vashenko was standing in the doorway of his office, jacket already off at 10 in the morning, sleeves rolled to the elbows the way he worked when he was deep in something. He had that quality, a stillness that made a room feel organized around him. 4 years I'd worked in his legal compliance department, 4 years of keeping the boundary between professional respect and whatever else lived. In the way he sometimes paused at my desk, like he was trying to remember something. "Fine," I said, "just the Meridian filings." He looked at my phone, face down on the desk, and then back at me. "I'll need the Harbor Bay easements by noon if you can manage it." "Already done." He almost smiled. "I know, I was checking if you were going to tell me." He went back to his office and I went back to pretending the texts weren't there. By the time I left the building that evening, there were 11 of them, each one a little tighter than the last. Curtis was waiting outside my apartment in Parkdale. He was sitting on the front step with his camera bag and 2 coffees from Roncesvalles. And for a moment I remembered exactly who he'd been when I met Charney, intensely present in a way that felt like being chosen. He'd had a show at a gallery on Queen West. He'd taken me to the opening, and I'd thought I was falling for a whole life. "You took the long way," he said, handing me one of the coffees. There was a delay on the 504. "Your phone said you were on Bay Street until 6:40. I wrapped both hands around the cup. The coffee had gone cold. I was finishing the Meridian filings. "With Vashenko?" "With my computer," I said, alone, in my office. He stood, and I watched him calculate something behind his eyes. "I'm not trying to start anything, I worry. You know I worry." I did know. That was the thing. The worry had felt like love for so long that by the time it started feeling like something else, I'd built my whole life around it. We went inside. He stayed for dinner and then stayed the night, and I lay awake beside him, listening to the city and thinking about exits again. The first time he grabbed me, we were fighting about a work dinner I hadn't told him about in advance. It was a Thursday, mid-April, the kind of evening where the light off the lake goes pink, and you almost believe winter was worth it. Nikolai had taken the whole compliance team to Canoe to celebrate closing the Harbor Bay acquisition. I'd texted Curtis from the restaurant. He'd read it and said nothing. By the time I got home at 10:30, he'd been drinking. Not heavily. Just the version of Curtis that had been showing up more often lately. The one who stood very still and chose his words with the deliberateness of someone laying down cards. "A client dinner," he said. "A team dinner, all of us were there. And Vashenko. He's our employer, Curtis. He was thanking us for the quarter." "He was thanking you." He said it the way you'd say a fact you'd known for years and were finally getting around to naming. "I see how he is with you." "He's professional. He's always been professional." He crossed the kitchen so quickly I didn't have time to step back. His hand closed around my wrist. Not a grab, not yet, just a grip that said I could, and I went still the way you go still when your body recognizes danger before your mind has caught up. "Curtis," my voice came out even. I'd gotten good at even. "You're hurting my wrist." He let go, stepped back, ran a hand through his hair like he was clearing something. "I didn't. I'm sorry. I just need you to be honest with me." "I have been honest with you." "Then, why does it feel like you're always half somewhere else?" I didn't answer. The honest answer was, because being here has started to feel like holding my breath, and I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. He left around midnight. I sat on the bathroom floor and looked at the ring of red on my wrist and thought, okay, this is the shape of what this is. The next time he came for me, 3 weeks later, he'd been drinking more. I'd stayed late at the office. The quarterly compliance audit had been eating my evenings for 2 weeks. I hadn't texted him the moment I was heading out, because I'd needed 10 minutes of walking in the dark without my phone lighting up. That was the whole thing. 10 minutes of just the street sounds and the smell of spring, and my own feet on the pavement. He was inside when I got home. He'd kept a key for 8 months. I'd asked for it back twice. He knew about the walk. The location data had been sitting there, not moving, for 11 minutes. To Curtis, stillness on a map meant something happening that wasn't on the map. He hit me, an open hand, hard enough that the right side of my face went from warm to ringing in a second, and I was too surprised to do anything but stand there with my hand flying up to my cheek while my vision went briefly white at the edges. We both stood there in the sudden silence of it. "Get out," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like someone speaking from the other side of a door. "Isla. Get out of my apartment right now." "I'm sorry." He was already unraveling at the edges, the way he always did after, voice breaking, hands reaching, the whole performance of a man being horrified by himself. "I swear to God I'm sorry, I didn't." "Out." I was shaking so hard I had to hold on to the doorframe. "Get out, or I'm calling 911 right now." He left. He slammed the door hard enough that something fell off the shelf in the hallway, and then I was alone in my apartment listening to my own breathing. My phone was in my hand. I'd been holding it the whole time. I should have called 911. I know that now, and I think I knew it then. But I also knew what the next 12 hours would look like. The questions at the station, the forms, the waiting, the way the officer would look at me when I described the location sharing and the work dinners, and the way he'd escalated so gradually I'd almost missed it. I'd watched it happen to a colleague 2 years before. The forms, the maybe, maybe not, the call her lawyer advised her not to make. What I knew was that I was alone in my apartment with a bruise forming on my face, and I was terrified he'd come back, and the only number I reached for was one I'd saved for 18 months without ever using. I pressed call. It rang twice. Isla, Nikolai's voice, immediate, no performance of being woken up. Just Isla, what's wrong? The sound of my name, the way it landed, without hesitation, split something in me that I'd been holding together for a very long time. "Can you come get me?" I whispered. I need. Can you please come get me?" A pause so brief it barely registered. "Then where are you?" "Home, Parkdale, but Curtis might come back and I can't." "Lock the door, both locks." I could already hear him moving, keys, the particular quiet of a large space being crossed quickly. "I'm 20 minutes away. Stay on the phone." I locked the door. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, and I stayed on the phone, and he talked to me in that low, even voice. Not about what had happened, not pressing, just present, until I heard the knock at the door and his voice through it at the same time. When I opened the door, the first thing he looked at was my face. Something moved through his expression, there and gone, but I'd seen it. "Do you have a bag?" he said. "I can get one." "Then get one. Enough for a few days." He stepped inside just far enough to keep watch on the hallway. Bodan was at the bottom of the stairs, I found out later. "You're not staying here tonight." His condo was on the 38th floor of a building near Yorkville, floor-to-ceiling glass, and a guest room that looked like it had never been used. I sat on the edge of the bed while Dr. Gwynnon, a quiet woman with efficient hands, and the manner of someone who'd spent 20 years in emergency medicine before going private, examined my face and my wrist, and the bruise I hadn't even realized was there on my shoulder. "Nothing broken," she said. "Ice for 48 hours, then heat. The contusion on your cheek will look worse before it improves." She glanced toward the door. "He wants to document everything before the bruising changes. Photographs, if you'll allow it." "For a police report." "That's up to you." I let her take the photographs. I wasn't ready to call it a police report yet, but I understood the value of documentation. After she left, I found Nikolai standing at the window with his back to the room, a glass of water in his hand that he hadn't been drinking from. He'd changed into jeans and a gray shirt, and it did something to me, that small domesticity. The fact that he'd run out the door in whatever he was wearing and brought me here, and was now just standing in his kitchen, being a person who had water he wasn't drinking. "I don't know how to thank you for this," I said from the doorway. He turned. "Don't. What he did is not something that earns gratitude for basic human decency." He paused. "You can sleep. We'll talk about next steps when you've rested." I didn't sleep. Or rather, I fell into the flat gray of exhaustion somewhere after 2 a.m, and surfaced again when it was light, and then lay there while everything rearranged itself into the shape of what it actually was. When I picked up my phone, there were 19 text messages from Curtis. They started with apologies and ended with threats, and somewhere in the middle. "You think running to Vashenko makes you look innocent?" I put the phone down, then I opened my banking app. Something had been nagging at me since the night before. Something about the joint account Curtis had convinced me to open 7 months ago. "It's just easier for the bills," he'd said. "It's practical." And I'd thought, yes, practical, sensible, what adults who live together-ish do. The joint account had $114 in it. I had deposited $2,300 from my last paycheck 2 weeks ago. I kept looking. 3 cash advances I hadn't made. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Online purchases at retailers I'd never shopped at. And then I pulled up my credit report, something I hadn't checked since signing my lease 18 months ago. And I sat there in a guest room in Yorkville, reading about 2 credit cards I hadn't opened, a personal line of credit at a bank I'd never walked into, and a financing agreement for equipment I'd never touched. Combined, just over $22,000, all of it tied to my name, my SIN number, my date of birth, my address. He hadn't just hurt me, he'd been dismantling me from the inside out, one application at a time, for months. My hands were shaking when I called Nikolai. He picked up immediately, like he'd been waiting. "He used my SIN," I said. "He's opened accounts, credit cards, a line of credit, over $20,000 in debt I never authorized. It's all in my name." The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds, I counted. "I'm coming back upstairs," he said, and his voice had shifted into something very quiet that I understood was not calm at all. "Don't close any of those pages." He sat across from me at the kitchen table and looked at every screen I showed him, and I watched his expression get very still, in the way that meant something. Underneath it was not still at all. "We're calling the fraud division of the Toronto police," he said when I'd shown him the last one. "He'll say I authorized everything." "Did you?" "No." "Then it's fraud, and fraud leaves records." He reached for his phone. "I have a lawyer who handles financial crime. She'll tell you exactly what to do." Nikolai. It was the first time I'd said his name without the Mr. in front of it, and we both registered it, neither of us commenting. "I want to do this myself. I want to be the one who makes the report, gathers the evidence. I don't want it handled for me." He set his phone down on the table and looked at me for a long moment. "Then we'll help you do it yourself. What do you need?" What I needed was to stop feeling like someone who had let this happen to her. What I needed was to understand the architecture of it. The joint account, the key he'd kept, the location sharing, the isolation from my sister and the friends who'd drifted away, and the credit most of all, because I'd thought, until this morning, that the worst he'd done was hit me. I'd been so wrong. The fraud investigator's name was Constable Delorme. She worked out of the Toronto Police's Financial Crimes Unit, and she looked at the file I'd built over the following 3 weeks. Organized chronologically, cross-referenced, flagged with screenshots of the application dates against Curtis's own location data from those same days, with the expression of someone pleasantly surprised. "You've done significant work here, Ms. Brennan." I wanted to make sure there weren't gaps. "There aren't." She turned a page. The credit applications were submitted on 3 different days over a 4-month period, all during business hours when you were, according to your employment records, in the office. She looked up. "He used your SIN without your consent. That's identity theft under Section 402.2 of the Criminal Code. Combined with the fraud charges, this is a serious file." The words settled into me, not as relief, exactly. More like the particular feeling of putting a name to something you've been living with unnamed. "What happens next?" "We present to the Crown. Given the documentation, I'd expect charges to proceed within the month." She closed the folder. "In the meantime, I'd strongly recommend a restraining order under Ontario's domestic violence provisions. The assault alone justifies it." The restraining order came through 8 days later, with help from the lawyer Nikolai had connected me to. Curtis was prohibited from coming within 200 meters of my apartment, my workplace, or Nikolai's building. I moved back to my apartment the week after that. Curtis had been there before me. I knew it the moment I opened the door. The careful wrongness of rooms that had been gone through, a drawer left open, a stack of books moved and not quite replaced. What was gone? 3 years of journals, a box of photographs I'd kept since university, a necklace my grandmother had given me before she died. I stood in the middle of my living room and decided something in that moment. I was not going to grieve the things he'd taken. Not now, not here. Right now, I was going to take photographs of the apartment and send them to my lawyer. The Crown prosecutor filed charges the following month. 2 counts of identity theft. 3 counts of fraud over $5,000 under the Criminal Code. 1 count of assault causing bodily harm, based on Dr. Nguyen's photographs and documentation. Curtis's lawyer argued I'd authorized the credit applications. The handwriting analysis said otherwise. I testified for 1 hour and 40 minutes. I did not waver. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. Guilty on all counts. I walked out of Old City Hall into a cold November afternoon and stood on the steps and breathed the air off the lake and felt something uncomplicated settle in my chest. Not triumph, not vindication. Just okay. It happened. It's done. Nikolai was waiting by the car. He didn't ask how it went. He could read it in my face. "It's over," I said. "The hard part," he corrected gently. "Come on, you need to eat." The months that followed were the first time, in years that my life felt like mine. I stayed in my apartment in Parkdale. I started running again. Something I'd abandoned 2 years ago, when Curtis said it made him nervous that I was out alone in the dark. I called my sister every Sunday. I went back to the ceramics class I'd quit when he said it was a waste of money. At the office, I took on the restructuring of Vashenko Group's compliance framework, a project I'd been building proposals for since my 2nd year there. Nikolai approved everything I recommended and gave me the team I'd asked for, and the work was hard and absorbing and entirely mine. We had coffee together most mornings, just the 2 of us in his office before the building filled up. We talked about the city, about the cases I was working, about books and small things and everything, except what hummed underneath every conversation, the thing I was not yet ready to name out loud. "You seem different," my sister said one Sunday over the phone. "Different how?" "Less careful, like you've stopped rehearsing what you're going to say before you say it." She was right. I'd been rehearsing things, words, expressions, explanations, apologies. For so long I'd forgotten it was something I was doing. Stopping felt less like a decision, and more like a weight I'd simply put down. I was in Tofino for a week in March, solo. I'd booked it on a Tuesday evening on a whim, a small rental on the peninsula with a view of the Pacific, and enough quiet to hear myself think. I spent most of the week walking the beach and painting watercolors, badly and happily. I texted my sister pictures of the fog. On the last evening, I watched the sun go into the water and felt something I hadn't felt in long enough that I'd stopped expecting it. Ease. The particular ease of being exactly where you are. I sent Nikolai a photo of the sunset, just the image, no caption. His reply came in 3 minutes, Stunning, safe flight tomorrow. And then, after a pause, I'll have coffee ready. I smiled at my phone in the dark on a beach in British Columbia, and the thing I'd been not naming named itself quietly in the back of my mind. When I got back, there were wildflowers on my desk. Not arranged, gathered the way flowers look when someone picked them thinking of something else. The card said, "Welcome back." That afternoon, I knocked on the frame of his open office door. "Do you have a minute?" He looked up from his screen. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise, but the quality of someone who has been patient for a very long time and is still, with great discipline, being patient. I sat down without waiting to be asked. The city spread out behind him, all gray and blue under a March sky. "I want to say something clearly," I said, "so there's no ambiguity." He set his pen down. "I'm not grateful. I want to start with that. I'm not confused about what I feel because you helped me. I was grateful for the help, and that was its own thing, and it's been 8 months and I know the difference between the two now." I held his gaze. "What I feel for you is not gratitude." He was very still. "I choose you. Not because you came when I called. Because of every morning between then and now. Because every time I've tried to figure out what I actually want. Not what's safe, not what's practical. You're in the answer." The silence lasted long enough that I wondered if I'd miscalculated everything. Then he said quietly, "I've been calling you Sonechko for 8 months." I hadn't asked what it meant. I'd looked it up. "Little son," he confirmed, and his voice was rougher than I'd ever heard it. "Because that's what you are in this office. Since the day you argued with my attorneys about the Meridian easements in your second week." I laughed, which was not what I'd expected to do. He crossed the room and stopped in front of me, and the 4 years of careful professional distance collapsed in the space between us. He took my face in both hands, slowly enough that I could have stepped back at any point, and kissed me with the particular gentleness of someone who has been thinking about something for a very long time and wants to get it right. We were 3 months in when Curtis's sentencing came through. 14 months at Maplehurst, with 3 years of probation and a restitution order for the fraudulent credit he'd opened in my name. The credit bureau had already corrected my file. My rating was recovering. The joint account had been closed and audited. 14 months isn't forever. I knew that. I'd accepted it. What I hadn't accepted was the message I got on a Thursday in April from a number I didn't recognize. "Miss Brennan, this is Sergeant Lefevre from Halton Regional Police. We're asking you to contact us regarding Curtis Hale, who absconded from a supervised work release program this morning." I read it twice, then I called Nikolai. He answered on the first ring. I saw the notification. "I'm already on with Bodan. Stay in the office." "I'm not hiding in the office, Nikolai." A beat. Then I heard him adjust, heard him meet me where I was. "What do you need?" "Security on the building updated today. Bodan walks me to my car until this is resolved, and I need to call Sergeant Lefevre back and find out what they know." The first 2 are already done. Curtis had been flagged at a bus terminal in Mississauga. He was heading toward Toronto. He'd told another inmate, before the release, that he had unfinished business. I went back to work. I answered my emails. I ate lunch at my desk. I was not going to let him eat up the days I was already living. He found me 4 days later, outside the path entrance on Bay Street. I was walking to the parking garage, Bodan 12 steps behind me, and I heard my name. He looked diminished. Thinner, pale under the fluorescent light of the underground concourse, his jacket too big. He looked like the outline of someone I'd once thought I knew. "I just need to talk to you," he said. "You don't have the right to need anything from me." I kept my voice level. Bodan had already stepped up on my left, and I could see 2 plainclothes officers moving in from the concourse entrance. Sergeant Lefevre had been thorough with the updates. "You used my SIN to open fraudulent credit. You hit me. You went through my apartment and took things that were mine. And then you ran. That's not the whole story. It's the story that matters." I held his gaze and I thought about exits the way I used to, and I realized I wasn't looking for one. I was standing still, and I was fine. "Turn yourself in, Curtis. That's the only way this ends." "You're with him." The too bright look was back in his eyes. "After everything." Yes, I said it clearly without apology, and Nikolai treats me like someone who gets to choose her own life. You treated me like property you were afraid of losing. I know the difference now. He moved, not at me, toward the exit, but Bowden was already closing in, and the 2 officers reached him before he'd taken 3 steps. He went down cursing, and I stood there watching, and I felt nothing that resembled fear, something much quieter and more solid than that. Curtis received an additional 8 months for the absconsion, and was transferred to a higher security facility. The appeal his parents funded was denied. I signed a lease on a larger apartment in Roncesvalles that spring. 2 bedrooms, a room I turned into a studio, real morning light through east-facing windows. I paid first and last month myself, all $2,800 of it, and I stood in the empty living room and felt the particular weight of a space that was entirely mine. Nikolai helped me move on a Saturday. He carried boxes, argued with the furniture delivery people when a bookshelf arrived damaged, and ate takeout pho with me on the floor of the living room when everything was done, because I didn't have a table yet. It suits you, he said, looking around at the half-unpacked chaos. It's a mess. It's being made into something. He handed me another spring roll. That suits you. I looked at him across the cartons, and the cardboard boxes, and the life I was in the middle of building, and something settled in my chest with the finality of a door, closing on a room I didn't need anymore. Move in with me, I said. Not a plan, exactly. Just a sentence that was true. Not yet. Maybe not for a year. But that's where this is going, and I wanted to say it out loud. He was quiet for a moment. I've been waiting for you to say it. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you'd say it when you were ready. He looked at me steadily. Sonechko, I would have waited as long as it took. I set down my takeout container, leaned across the floor, and kissed him in the middle of my half-unpacked apartment on a Saturday evening in May, while the light came in gold through the east-facing windows. 18 months ago, I was counting exits. Now I was standing still in a room of my own making, choosing someone who had never once asked me to be smaller than I was, and it felt, finally and unmistakably, like being home.